Hello, we are live. Welcome to this session. It's going live on YouTube, live on LinkedIn, and it will be recorded so you can catch up on it later on. My name is Stephen Locke. I'm the founder and director at Stephen Locke Coaching Limited. We're going to spend about 30 minutes together today. I'm going to talk to you on this topic, the secret weapon of real leaders. So, should we dive right in? Let's go. Now, a note, if you haven't been to a LinkedIn Live before, I can't see you. You can see me. So this might feel a little bit like a Zoom or something like that, but it's a little bit different. So feel free, turn off your camera, stroke your cat, get your lunch, whatever. Nobody can see you. But as I hope you can see me, I can also pick up messages in the chat as well. So if you go below the live that you're watching and you post a message there, I can see it in the chat. So if you want to ask a question, make a comment, that's super helpful, and I will get to them when I can. Also, I'm trying to pay attention to what I'm talking, so if it takes me a minute or two to notice, please forgive me. Right, this is what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to tell you about what I believe is the number one skill that really sets the best leaders apart. And that is the ability that they have to coach their people. And that's not to become a coach, it's not to do what I do for a living, but it is to borrow some of the techniques and the tools and the tricks that we use in order that they can really, really help their teams to thrive. We're going to talk about why this matters, particularly in modern organizations. But also, I'm going to touch a little bit on why it matters in the sense that we have different generational expectations of what work might be. And so I hope I'm going to convince you that developing some skills, coaching as leader skills, isn't something that's just a nice to have, a little bit on the side. It is really what separates okay managers from genuine leaders. It's the teams that really thrive are the ones where they have this culture, particularly, hopefully, coming from the people at the top, which, as I know you've signed up for Watch This, that means people like you. Now, first things first, let's have a quick conversation about why we even have different leadership styles. You'll hear me referring to the idea of a coaching style of leadership, but what do I really mean by that, and why does it matter? So first thing, one size doesn't fit all. Leadership is not a particular one-off skill that you learn and then you deploy it. It's not a technique or a tool. It's a set of techniques. It's a set of tools. It's a way of behaving. It's a way of showing up. It's an attitude. And that attitude and that stance that you take can change in different situations. I'm going to give you a real concrete example of that. If you have somebody in your team who is required to have a technical skill that can be learned under instruction, there is no point trying to coach that skill into somebody. And I'll explain a little bit more what I mean by coaching later on. You should tell them, show them, instruct them how to do that. And so you could be like that because it's a technical skill. And later on, have a conversation with the same person where they are having a challenge, perhaps interpersonal challenge within your team. And then telling them what to do is not the most appropriate thing. Coaching them and helping them to see and learn for themselves how to handle situations better means that when you're not there, they will get better at carrying out that particular skill. So if it's technical, tell people what to do. And if it's not, try and coach and encourage. And we'll explain why a little more as we go on. But also your team itself matters. Like how mature are they? If you've worked together for a long period of time, you probably have a shorthand, you have an understanding of each other's personalities and how you mix and how you come together, who has strengths, who has weaknesses, and that will settle down. If you're a new team, that might not be something that you have straight away, and so you have to develop a culture, in which case to begin with, maybe, yeah, you do tell people what to do a little bit more, you give them clear boundaries, and you lead in a little more of a directive way. The culture of organizations makes a huge difference. If you are in a very hierarchical organization, then it's going to be difficult to be extremely non-hierarchical. It's not impossible, but you are going to have to work with the culture and also the natures of the people that you work with. Excuse me. I want to give you a real example with that. I've been coaching an executive team in an organization that is quite traditional, and it is traditional for a reason, and that's because they are adjacent to the financial services industry, and they are responsible for looking after systems which look after people's money. Now, in that circumstance, the culture of the organization, which has developed over a long period of time, is one of caution, it's one of precision, it's one of security first. And you would really hope that an organization that's looking after your money is going to have a lot of people that are not maverick, that are not saying, hey, why don't we just try this latest AI tool? You want people in a situation like that to be and have that culture and have that way of working. And so the leaders there, they can use a coaching style that's really, really good, but they can't be overly fluid, because actually the nature of the work demands that people do follow rules, they do follow procedures for the most part. Now, this can be a bit of a challenge if you then want those people to innovate, but that's where hiring an amazing coach really, really helps. But the point here is simply that you cannot just have one style. You need to adapt. But I'm going to make an argument that for the majority of people who are going to watch this, and the majority of people that I work with who are knowledge workers, having a coaching leadership style is probably the one that is the most valuable to develop. But let's just contrast it. I've already used the word directive. So the idea of that is you have a leadership style where you're basically telling people what to do all of the time. And I've given you one example. It would also be appropriate in certain circumstances where safety is really, really important. I wouldn't want somebody that was coming to handle a situation with a fire to be asking people how they feel about any commands that they were given. I would want them to just say in a very clear voice, do this or else you will die. You know, I don't want a participatory style of leadership in that circumstance. However, that same person, when they are training and trying to develop a culture within the team away from an emergency situation, they could very well use a coaching style to try and make sure that everybody understands and can express their nature and their personality in an effective way for the team. I didn't use this word, but a participative style of leadership is one where you are regularly bringing people together, you are seeking consensus all of the time before you make decisions and that kind of thing. Now, that again is a really useful leadership style to have. Delegative is the idea that you create a situation. This works particularly well in extremely large organizations. If decision making gets concentrated at the top, you create essentially a huge series of bottlenecks through an organization. So a capacity to delegate well and a culture of effective delegation can be really, really useful. But again, doesn't really encourage innovation, doesn't really encourage agility and things like that. I'm sure everybody that's watching this at some point has worked under or been inspired by a visionary leader. I certainly have in my time. And this is the person that can paint a picture of a brighter, sunny uplands and get everybody to work hard to go towards it. It's also perhaps the most, I'll say that a different way. If we don't stop and think what is leadership, it tends to be the kind of thing that we would think of. It's a great, heroic person who, you know, leads the charge, gets everybody to go do something amazing that they didn't believe in. And having some sense of vision is really important for leaders, but you don't necessarily need to be that charismatic, heroic figure. In fact, an over-dependence on that kind of thing in organizations is a bit of a problem, because for one thing, if you take that visionary away, everything collapses, because the culture was one about following them. But also it can be a little bit difficult for alternative voices to be heard, and having a really good culture where you have a lot of diversity of opinion is definitely a really good thing for the majority of organizations. And most of us, let's be honest, over-rely on one of those things. I do this for my profession these days, but in a previous life, I had a job where I managed teams and had to have influence over a network of people that was national in the UK at times, and my default standard style of leadership would have been somewhere between the coaching and the visionary side of things. I was pretty good at convincing people to get behind an idea and work towards it, to believe in it and things like that, and on a day-to-day basis tended to coach people. And if I'm honest, there was probably a bit of a weakness in that I wasn't as directive as I should have been on occasion. I was perhaps a little bit overly participative on occasion as well. And I was not amazing in the beginning of my career at delegating, but I did get better at that over time. So we need to flex between these different things. But I think the coaching style of leadership is one where you really can learn some tools and techniques and tricks that very quickly can take you from not behaving that way to behaving that way. And in fact, I was working with a client this morning who is a chief technology officer at a very big organization, who told me that some of the coaching tips and tricks that I'd helped them to learn a couple of sessions ago had transformed the way that they are working with their team. And I know that's true because I also work with their team, and they've told me that they've seen a change in behaviors. So why does it matter now? And why is that any different to what's come before? So leadership is changing, and here is just some of the reasons why. Leaders themselves are being asked to adapt an awful lot more, and partly that is just the rapid pace of change that has come through technology, and it seems to be accelerating with things like AI. It's meaning that organizations are going through a lot of turmoil. They are changing, they are adapting quickly, and leaders need to do that themselves. And also the idea that you would work on a timeline of, like, say, 6 months on a project, you know, where you knew pretty much for that period of time that you were going to be working on a particular thing, and when it was delivered, it would be shipped and so on. That just isn't the case. It's not the same in the case in the private sector. For the most part, it's not the case in the public sector either. And that's driven a little bit more by political change and the need to adapt to economic circumstances and changes in budgets and things like that. There's also been a real shift and an expectation that leaders develop emotional intelligence. And that is something that, you know, back in the 1950s, I'm not sure many of us would have been talking about. But we worked in a different world then. And in fact, emotional intelligence is the general idea that you have the skills to be able to understand your own emotions, but also to work with the emotions of other people. This is something that I'm finding more and more is a challenge, because there is a difference between, say, my generation, I'm Generation X, and people who are fractionally older than me, and people are coming into the workforce in the last 10 years. There is a difference in the way that people express themselves and what they think is appropriate to be dealt with at work. And so the ability to work in both directions, for younger people to be able to understand and work with behaviors and patterns that they see from older people, and for older people to be able to not freak out at the way that Gen Zs talk in the workplace. All of that's super useful. And in fact, I run a workshop for teams on how to develop emotional intelligence, which has worked pretty successfully, particularly in organizations where there is that mismatch in expectations, or in ones where we maybe have self-selected a group of people who are more comfortable with hard skills than soft skills. Then, of course, we've got remote leadership skills. That is a real challenge. If you don't see people every day, how do you know how to help them? And how do you know that you are being useful as a leader? It's not so easy. Similar, there's a lot of movement at the moment, isn't there, because of political situations about DEI. And in actual fact, regardless of what you think about this topic or how it's changing, it is adding a layer of challenge to for leaders to deal with. And actually, using coaching skills is a fabulous way of encouraging a person as an individual, rather than considering any layers of, labels or attributes or things like that they might have. And it really bridges the gap between different types of people. And then finally, purpose-driven leadership. This is something that is super popular and has been for quite a long time. What's my why and how do I find it? But also, what are the values of this organization and what do we stand for? And those kinds of things. Again, if you think back to the Mad Men era, I don't think many people sat around really thinking about these things, but it's a very, very important part of modern life. And so it's important that we develop skills to support that. I've put a little quote here from somebody who was actually my mentor and coach, George Binney, who wrote a book called Living Leadership. And he said that leadership is a social act. It happens between people. And he came to that conclusion after living with some really amazing leaders from around the world and studying how they behaved and discovering that actually the heroic leadership style it might be what you see some of the time, but really that's not how great leaders get things done. They get things done, conversation by conversation and by encouraging and coaching people to be the best that they can be. So that's how leadership is changing. And just a couple more thoughts on this. Coaching as an act means that you're developing people rather than controlling them. And that, I think, speaks to all of those changing circumstances. The more that you can be seen to and to actually help to develop your people rather than control them, the more you get the behaviors that you want to suit the modern world. And frankly, the majority of people who come into knowledge work these days, they don't want to be told what to do. They do want to feel that they own things, but therein is an interesting paradox, because how do they develop the skills in order to take the ownership of a task or a project or a team if nobody ever tells them what to do? Now, there are some practical ways that you can give people instruction, but leadership itself and learning how to do it is it's a craft, it's an art, it's something that takes time and skill, and you need mentors, you need coaches to help you develop those skills. It isn't something that you're going to do just on your first day on your own. And none of this is just my opinion. It really isn't just theory. So Google ran a really amazing multi-year project where they looked at all of their workforce. It was called Project Oxygen, and they found that coaching was the top behavior of the best performing managers that they had, and it's one of the best performing companies in the world. And Gallup repeatedly finds in its research of leaders across the whole of the world that you get much higher employee engagement if you are the kind of coach, the kind of manager or leader who coaches their people. So it matters. It matters now. I hope I've convinced you that. So what are the benefits? I've hinted at some of these things already, but I have one of my friends always likes to break things down into threes. So if you're watching, hi, Alex. But these are three things. If you develop this kind of style, you get better. You develop trust. You build the capability of the people that you are working with. And by the way, this can work not just if you think about it in a hierarchical sense, in the people that you have like accountability and leadership responsibility for, but it can happen across as well. So with your peers, you build capability, but crucially, you reduce dependence. The more that you use this style of leadership, the more that people begin to realize that they can solve problems themselves and have the confidence and the skills to do that, because it's like any kind of muscle, the more that you develop it, the more that you think, oh, I'm going to figure out how to solve that problem. I have the ability to solve that problem. The more you do that, the more, guess what? You can solve problems, and you will solve problems, and the less you are dependent on your manager to tell you what to do. So don't take my word for it. There's just a couple of really influential writers that I'm a big fan of. So the first would be Frederic Laloux, who wrote a very influential book called Reinventing Organizations. If you haven't read it, I recommend it to anybody. Top tip, there are two versions if you go on Amazon. One of them is the original, which is kind of traditional books full of case studies and things like that. It's amazing. It's really, really good. There is also a graphical version. Now, that is not the lesser version. The graphical version is brilliant because whoever illustrated it really did a brilliant job of bringing a lot of the concepts together in that book in a way that are much easier to digest than the case studies. The general idea of reinventing organizations is to consider that perhaps because society is changing over time, the best, most high-performing organizations that we have in the coming decade or so are going to use different ways of meeting, different ways of deciding, different ways of collaborating. They're going to create different sorts of atmospheres and cultures and things like that. And this is a quote from Frederic: people who have an extraordinary capacity to deal with complexity and uncertainty if they are trusted and give them the right information, and coaching, I think, is the best way to develop that trust. That's Frederic Laloux. Highly recommend the book. And from a very different world, L. David Marquette used to be the captain of a nuclear submarine in America. He took over the worst performing nuclear submarine in the Navy, and in a short couple of years turned it into the best performing. And he did this. His book, Turn This Ship Around, is a must read, I think, for any leader. And he developed this leader model where he says leadership is communicating to people their worth and potential so clearly that they are inspired to see it in themselves. And that is absolutely the heart of coaching. Through the conversations that we have as coaches, we develop people's self-belief far beyond what they expect when they start. So a couple of good books there to add onto your list. But what if you don't do this? Well, Grumpy Stephen's going to turn up in his hero hat and he's going to say, oi, you're killing trust. You're limiting the growth, not only of the people in the organization, but of yourself and the growth potential of your collective endeavors. And frankly, you're going to burn yourself out as well. And we don't want to do that. There are plenty of people who come to me for coaching who are really struggling, or they have burnt out and they want to get back on the horse again. You're far better getting this remedy before you get to that situation. So trust, Coach Stephen, I know what I'm talking about. So we don't want you to kill trust. We don't want you to limit growth, and we don't want you to burn out. If public service announcement, if you feel like you are really struggling with that, please send me an email or send me a DM, and I'm sure I have, even if you're not ready for a coach, I'm sure I have resources and advice that I can send to you. So don't be alone. Right. How do you do this? I'm sure I've convinced you that this is absolutely the way that you want to develop yourself from this point forward, but how do you do it? So, well, you won't be surprised to know that I run a workshop on this kind of thing, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this in a moment. It's a really successful workshop as it happened, but here's a couple of practical suggestions from that. The first one is to try and make sure that you, as often as you possibly can, you ask an open question. And just in case you don't know the difference between an open and a closed question, a closed question has a right or a wrong, a yes or a no, or a factual answer. So what time is it? Is a closed question. Do you prefer red or green? Is a closed question. There's only two answers to that, isn't there? There's only one time that it is at the moment. Those are closed questions, where an open question doesn't have a fixed answer. So here's a really, really good example of that. Let's say somebody has made a mistake. You know, something's gone wrong in a process in your work, and you say, "What did you do?" Now that is not a bad question because you're beginning to ask somebody like to be curious. But it's still a little bit focused on them and their error. But if you were to say something like, what are the conditions that led up to this? Then you've asked a question that allows them to explore. So let's say email didn't get sent on time and you say, why didn't you do that? Well, for a start, that's a bit of a challenge. And also you are you're really asking them for just give me a reason. That's it. So it's kind of a closed question. Why did you not do that? But if you say, what are the conditions that led up to this? They can go, well, I did forget. I admit that I missed the deadline. But if you remember, we also had this other project and I was with a client and I made a decision to stick with the client because I knew that that was a more important thing to do right now. And then when I did that, I needed to send up a follow-up email and then I'm sorry, it got lost. Okay, now you can work back from that and go, okay, how do we avoid this happening in the future? And then you can have that conversation with the person. All of this time, you're actually just exploring ideas and they are learning. If you go with a closed question, like who's to blame, right? Would be a horrible closed question. But if you did that, then you've closed down any learning because whoever you're speaking to has gone to fight, flight, freeze mode, and you're not really going to get anywhere. Open questions are always the best. And the next tip would be try not to give advice, which is really hard if you are like more experienced or you have ideas. But what I encourage people to do often with this kind of thing is the next time you have a one-to-one with somebody, just set yourself a little personal challenge. Can you use the entire, say, 30 minutes or 15 minutes only asking questions and not giving any advice? Set yourself as that challenge and see what happens. I promise you, you will have a totally different kind of interaction to that you are used to. So, would you like to know more about this? Of course you would, because you're totally convinced that this is the right way forward. Now, there's a couple of things I want to tell you about. The first one is I am running a workshop online in just a couple of weeks on July the 22nd in the morning. This is a really popular workshop, which I've done quite a few times before. The way that it works is you come along to that, and in the first part, I teach you 10 different techniques that you can apply straight away. So I'm not turning you into a coach. I'm taking some of the techniques that we use in coaching and helping you to apply them to real management and real leadership situations. If you book a slot on that and you come along, you'll also get to meet other people who are doing the same thing. And in the second half of the workshop, the great bit is I get you to practice and I supervise that. You get coached. You also get to practice asking coaching kinds of questions. And it's a really fantastic way to learn. You also go away with a workbook full of all of the things that you learn and 100 coaching questions that I've assembled and categorized in different ways. So the questions around mindset, questions around making decisions and things like that. So you can apply them and you don't have to think of questions quite so much when you're having your one-to-ones. So that's the first opportunity. There is a link below this LinkedIn Live, or send me a DM or a message or an email and I'll send it to you. I'd love to see you there. It really is fantastic. And then also I do this for teams. So if you have a team that you think would benefit from this, then send me a message. What we do pretty much exactly the same thing. But the nice thing about doing it with a team is that we can also be discussing like real things related to culture and the circumstances that you work in at the same time. Ideally, we do this in groups of 3. And the reason for that is because that's how the coaching practice works best. If you're interested in that, send me an email. You can find my details all over my website and social media and things like that. Just in case you haven't seen it, this is my website, stephenlockcoaching.com, and that was 30 minutes. I hope you found it useful. Please get in touch if you would like to know more. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to hear from you soon.